For decades, America has tried to combat the harms of drug use primarily through banning drugs and incarcerating people who use them. But this has caused a violent underground market for drugs, increasing crime in our communities. It's caused contaminated substances, increasing overdose deaths, and it's caused incarceration to skyrocket, destabilizing families. What we're doing isn't working. Crime, death, and broken families are the collateral damage of using the criminal justice system to address the public health issue of drugs. If you're looking for a better path forward, you're in the right place. What if we changed our drug policies to prioritize life, health, harm reduction, and thriving? And what if it benefited all of us? Our criminal justice approach to drugs had a beginning, and it can have an end. Join us on the journey to end it for good. I'm Christina Dent, your host, and if you're new here, End It for Good is a nonprofit started in 2019, based in Mississippi, that invites people to support approaches to drugs that prioritize life and the opportunity to thrive. This podcast is one of the ways we do that. You can head over to episode 34 to hear my story as a conservative Christian foster mom, changing my own mind on the best path forward with drugs, and then come on back and dive in deeper. I didn't change my mind overnight, and most other people don't either. We all need time to learn, think, ask questions, and explore. Whatever your perspective is, I'm glad you're here. Let's journey together. Welcome back to the End It for Good podcast. I'm Christina Dent, your host. I'm super excited today to have Dr. Michele Ross with us. We're going to talk about 7-OH. You may have heard of it. You may not have. If you are on our newsletter list, you just got a newsletter about it recently, and our kind of perspective on that. But it has gone from something that I had never heard of 7 months ago to something that is a national conversation very quickly. And so we wanted to kind of bring multiple ways of education about what it is, why people are using it, because the FDA is recommending that it be moved to Schedule 1, which means high addiction potential, no medical benefit. And as you know, with End It for Good, we tend not to be in favor of Schedule 1ing things because it makes research really difficult, and it tends to just push it underground. And then you have all these extra harms of underground markets that are selling it, and contamination, and it's criminal organizations that are making the money, and consumers can be arrested for it. And it just leads to all of these additional harms, even if there is potential harm from the substance use itself. So we're going to dive into that. Go ahead and remind you that if you haven't subscribed to the podcast so far, go ahead and hit subscribe so you get all of the new episodes. And we'll see, we're going to be talking about lots of interesting things. The more we do this, the more interesting people we meet, like Dr. Ross, and the stories they have is just really incredible. And we're always looking for people with personal stories that inform their professional work. And that's what we've got today. So Dr. Michele Ross is an addiction neuroscientist with over a decade of experience in plant medicine research and education and advocacy. She's authored 5 books, including one called Kratom is Medicine. So you've heard us talk about kratom before, and today we're talking about 7-OH, which is very deeply related to kratom, which is why Dr. Ross is with us today. She is currently the chief scientific advisor at the nonprofit 7 Hope Alliance, and as a certified coach and harm reduction expert, she's helped hundreds of clients use plant medicines, including kratom and 7-OH, safely. She's been featured on the Today Show and Vice and Forbes, among others. So, Dr. Ross, we are so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited about 7-O. Addiction has touched my life in many ways, and chronic pain as well. I'd love to share that in 2009, I actually lost my little brother, John, to an alcohol and fentanyl overdose. And that definitely has impacted my work and really cemented, why I do addiction research and harm reduction in the first place. It's really to save lives.
Dive into your story and tell us. You have a really interesting story, and some people have asked me. So real quick, let me just say this.
Yeah.
So they've said, well, if you have people on the podcast who are working in whatever the industry is or whatever, they have an incentive towards a particular perspective. Look, I get paid to work at End It for Good. This is my full-time job. That
Mhm.
doesn't mean that I'm not passionate about the work, or that I don't believe in it, or that I'm somehow being bought off in some way. There's a lot of us that are able to do the work that we do because it is part of our professional work in some way. We don't see that as a negative. And so you've worked a lot. You do consulting, you do all kinds of things related to plant medicine, 7-OH. This is your career. We do not see that as a negative. We see it as, let's learn from people that have spent a lot of time in this, because this is your work and career. So I want to just say that before, and similar to how I'm sharing my personal story often when I'm talking about the work of End It for Good, we want to hear your personal story. It's part of why you have this passion for this, but also just to remind people that just because someone gets paid to work in a field doesn't mean that that's a negative thing. We're all putting food on the table for our families and deciding what we're going to do with 40 hours a week of our time, etc. And so our team here at End It for Good gets paid. We do have volunteers, but there are 5 of us that are on the team. This is our work. This is our career. And so that is not a bad thing. So we are excited about the fact that you have spent so much time and put so much of your passion and your professional career into learning about things so that you can come and help educate us on what you have learned about something that most of us have never heard of until very recently. So just wanted to say that, and then I would love to hear your story of how you got into this.
And I appreciate all of that so much as a former nonprofit executive director myself with a very small budget with 100% unpaid people at the time. The struggle bus is real when you don't have funding, and what you can do with funding when it comes to education research is just phenomenal. So support is really important. So to journey back in like a time capsule to why I'm really passionate about 7.0, you have to realize, I started off as a PhD neuroscientist who was trained in addiction research. I thought all drugs were bad. I grew up in New Jersey, actually across the street from a crack house. And so I saw, my fellow students get addicted. I saw all sorts of crimes, rapes, like arson, theft, so many different things happen in the house that I across the street from the house that I grew up in. And so I wanted to save the world from drugs. So I became that addiction neuroscientist. And unfortunately, that same the year after I got my degree, my little brother did pass away from fentanyl and alcohol. And that upset me, but also like reignited my passion for really helping people. But my career sort of took this really weird pivot that I could have never expected when I started to come down with a whole bunch of really weird symptoms. My arm didn't work. I was throwing up. I had all these different weird things. I ended up with black mold poisoning when I was living in Los Angeles, which was really weird. I ended up with blood clots in my lungs. Almost dying from that. I ended up on an oxygen tank, having to recover and doing all these things. I ended up getting diagnosed with fibromyalgia because I had these different pains in these different spots that wouldn't go away. And it just didn't make any sense. And they're like, oh, that's the disease you have. Congrats. It's incurable. And so you're going to be left with severe pain, muscle spasms, fatigue, eye problems, like a whole laundry list of health issues for the rest of your life. And we have different medications for them, but they have different efficacies and lots of different side effects, etc. I ended up marrying somebody who was in the let's say alternative medicine space, and in Los Angeles that meant somebody who worked in cannabis. And I had really not, I wasn't a cannabis consumer. I had never used that because I studied addiction. If you get drugs from the government, you're not supposed to be doing drugs. Let's just say that. So I was one of those clean as a whistle people that had never, experimented with anything. And so when I came down with all these different health issues, it was suggested, hey, you try cannabis, maybe that can help, with these nerve issues you're having and all these different things. And I started to work with it and realize, okay, some of these things that they told me they couldn't fix, literally a dead nerve thing. I literally had a hand like this for like 6 months. A topical cannabis cream worked and things like that. And so I started experimenting, founded a nonprofit in the cannabis space, and then started to learn about all the other natural things. Oh, there's medicinal mushrooms. Oh, there's these different compounds. Kratom actually was recommended to me by somebody, on social media, literally was like, Dr. Ross, you need to learn about this substance. And I go, okay, kratom, I've never heard of this. I can't go into the store. I can't go into like, the grocery store and buy kratom, similar to cannabis, but you have to go to special dispensaries, but people weren't really selling kratom all over the place. And this was back in 2016, 2015, actually, when I first discovered kratom, which is this plant that is amazing. It's grown in Southeast Asia, not in the United States, but like if you grind up the leaves, it looks like a green matcha powder. So you can take it in capsule form, powder, tea form, etc. And I started using it, and there's different strains and things like that. But I found out it was really helpful for my pain, is really helpful for the fatigue. And that was the really crushing part of my disease, was like, okay, even if I'm out of pain, I'm going to sleep. That was cannabis. Like, I'll go eat a little gummy and my pain will go away, but I'll be sleeping all day. And for me to be able to have something that was both energizing, but also pain relieving, I was able to really work with my chemistry a little bit better than regular prescription drugs and even some of these other alternatives that I was really supportive of, and was helping, thousands of people learn how to use this and educating doctors and things. But I found out it was like, it wasn't the right fit for me, and that was okay. But it's sort of interesting. And so I went through this journey using it, and I was consulting patients on both cannabis, kratom, mushrooms, things like that. I was like, if you want to try alternative medicine and be guided and not be harmed by it, or not become addicted to some of these things, because they do have addictive properties, work with somebody that understands pharmacology and has done this with a lot of people. And I will say this, I'm not an MD, I'm not a DO, I'm not a nurse, so I'm not a licensed healthcare professional. So, I can't give medical marijuana recommendations or things like that, but I do offer harm reduction. That's an important note, because I'm not treating anyone's disease. I'm just helping them safely use something that they were going to decide to use anyways. And so it's sort of like a very gray area, to be honest, of like wellness and healthcare, but it's sort of like, I'm your guide when it comes down to using cannabis safely or using kratom safely. And so, whatever pops up sort of in that natural medicine hood, and 7.0 popped up, recently. I didn't even use it, to be honest, when it first came out, because I wasn't really sure, even though I had written this book. I actually wrote the book Kratom is Medicine, and I talk about this substance 7.0 and it, I didn't use it myself when it first came out, because I wasn't sure whether it was safe. Just because something's a chemical and it's in a plant doesn't mean it's safe if it magically appears on the market, right? Is it got things in it? Is it the right dose? Are people lying about what's on the label? It took me a little bit to actually feel safe and start working with it, and learning how to use it with patients and things like that. And in, let's say, February, the nonprofit Seven Hope Alliance was founded to study this compound 7.0. And we'll go into like actually what it is, but
so real quick, because I just had this conversation yesterday, and it was really interesting. It reminded me of what you just said about kind of the, like, if you're interested in plant medicine. So I was talking to a guy yesterday who found healing from, he's a former Army Ranger, found healing from lots of things, PTSD, etc., with Ibogaine, another, not another, but, a psychedelic. He went to Mexico and had treatment for that, and it, saved his life. And he said, the interesting thing is that his dad is a pharmacist. And so he's been, working in pharmacy, age-wise, for a long time. He said, when my dad first became a pharmacist, what pharmacists did was combine different plants. Like that was what a pharmacy was back in the day, before kind of all of these manufactured pharmaceuticals started coming out in the, I think he said 60s and 70s. My knowledge of the pharmaceutical industry's history is low, so I'm not going to hang my hat on that. But it was really interesting. I thought, we think of pharmacy as people that give you various pills that have been manufactured in a, warehouse somewhere by a pharmaceutical company. And it was just interesting to hear, if we had lived 75 years ago, what a pharmacy was back then, and the things that they were doing was very much plant related and kind of putting plants together in the ways that they knew at the time that would help people. So it was just really fascinating to me. We think of plant medicine as like, whoa, this is kind of like this woo-woo thing. And it actually is more of a return to the way the world used to work rather than it is something like new and crazy.
Yeah, and it reminds me of a meme that an advocate was posting. It was saying that plant medicine isn't alternative medicine; it's the original medicine, and it really stuck with me. I think we've moved away from women sort of being the medicinal providers of households and herbalism and things like that, really reaching into your garden for things that can heal you. And instead, we automatically assume that the FDA, when it puts a stamp on something, whether it's a drug, whether, it's allowing a supplement to be in a market, that means it's safe. And we know from so many different examples in history that, a pharmaceutical has come on the market and they've had to pull it. Oh goodness, this caused strokes. This was addictive. We didn't think it was. Like, it doesn't always mean it's safe. A clinical trial, even, the gold standard placebo-controlled clinical trial can be very different from like what a drug is used or how it works in the real world. It can be very contained in a clinical trial and totally different. And so I think that there's this misunderstanding that FDA, even though they say that's safe, it doesn't always mean safe. And so I really want us to explore, what safety means, what efficacy means. Something could be work for a whole, thousands of people, but not for you. And then something could work for you, but not thousands of other people. We're all very different beings with very unique brain chemistry, very different medication history, health history, genetics, all those kinds of things. And so I think it's odd to think that like, hey, this one pill we made in a factory is going to work for everyone, and these plants, let's just ignore them because they don't have like the FDA stamp of approval. And I think, to be honest, I'm a spiritual person, and I think that a lot of these plants, in nature, some of them have been turned into pharmaceuticals, but like the plants are here because they're here to help us. And I think that disregarding the power of plants is a fool's errand.
So let's dive in a little bit to what 7-OH is. People maybe have heard about kratom. Maybe they've heard about 7-OH. If you've got your Google alert set up for it, like I have, you're seeing it every day because there's just this, after the FDA did a press conference related to 7-OH back in July, there's kind of all of this talk about it. So help us understand what is 7-OH versus what is kratom? What is the difference? What are people talking about? And is it gas station heroin? Is it the fourth wave of the opioid epidemic? I've seen both of those things regularly coming up, not just in the news, but in things that people just tell me offline or send me emails about, etc. So let's dive into that. You can share any of your story along the way as we go, but for people who are going, what the heck is 7-OH? What is it?
Yeah. I would say that the average person had never heard of it until about a month ago, from all the news and the negative press, unfortunately. So kratom is a plant that is grown in Southeast Asia. It's a tree. It's basically a relative of the coffee plant. So to think about that is like not something super exotic, but basically what happens is that the leaves of this plant are ground up and usually imported into the United States because we can't really grow it very well here because it's not humid and things like that. It's not tropical here. And so they'll get all this powder, and then different companies will package it up. People will take it as tea capsules, etc. For example, I have one company here that's like, here's little green capsules. That's what kratom is. And so somebody would take these capsules, and depending on the dose, usually lower doses can be more stimulating. So sometimes people will be like, oh, this is like a coffee alternative, like a caffeine alternative. And then you get energy and focus from it. Some people feel, with ADHD, say, hey, I can really focus. This is great. And then when you take higher doses, you can tend to get a little bit more pain relief, maybe relaxation. So there's like a whole spectrum of different benefits you can get from this plant. That's very interesting, very similar again to cannabis, where it's like, oh, this strain does this strain does that. And there's different products and things like that. And people really, start to use the things that work for them.
So interestingly enough, so I have a couple of friends that have used kratom, and this was even like back when I was first learning about it, and they just like messaged me and told me because I tend to talk about things publicly when I'm learning about them. So one of them said, "Hey, I used kratom because I started hearing about it, and I'm kind of into natural stuff, and to me, it felt like a strong cup of coffee."
Mhm.
And then I had another friend who said, "Hey, I used kratom because I had a C-section, and they did not give me enough pain
Mhm.
medicine in the hospital, and I was in agony. I'm trying to take care of this newborn, and so I used kratom as pain relief." So it's interesting, kind of the two spectrums of that, because the two people that I happen to hear from, one of them had used it and had that first experience of lower dose acts as a stimulant, and the other one had this experience of higher dose acts as a pain reliever. And so it is interesting. I've never used it myself. I don't have personal experience of it, but there's definitely, even among the few people here in Mississippi in my own community that I knew that used it, there was this kind of immediate, kind of broad range of people's experiences and what they were using it for.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And so, even the same person might use kratom differently on different days or for different needs, right? You might want to use it to wake up, in the morning. And then, say you have fibromyalgia, you want to, relieve your pain while you're sleeping so you don't wake up 5 times in the middle of the night because you're in horrible pain, right? You might take a little bit more, as a tea before you go to bed. So it's really, educating people on what the different alkaloids are, how to use these different products, really important. And so, one of the complexities that's been thrown in the mix is that in about really, really late 2023, about November, December, commercial products that contain just a single alkaloid and the kratom plant were introduced. And what are alkaloids? Alkaloids are like active plant compounds. And so, the kratom plant has about over 40 alkaloids in it. And so most of them, like, we don't have any idea what they do, or like they don't have a real big impact, but there's two major alkaloids. The first one is mitragynine. And so that's the one that's like the majority of the plant alkaloids are mitragynine. And so that will weakly activate opioid receptors, provide a little bit of pain relief, but it's sort of weak. To be honest, it takes eating it and activating it in your body through your liver to be activated. And it gets turned into, get this, an alkaloid called 7-hydroxymitragynine, or 7-O. So about 24% of that active ingredient, that mitragynine, gets converted into 7-O in your body. And that alkaloid is really interesting because it'll bind to those same receptors. But this time, unlike the mitragynine, which was really weak and didn't really do anything, it's going to actually activate that receptor a little bit more and is actually responsible for the pain relief. So if somebody is taking 7-O for pain relief, I'm sorry, if somebody's taking kratom for pain relief, what they really need is that mitragynine to go through the liver, to go through the gut, go into the liver, get broken down into 7-O, and then that 7-O binds to the opioid receptors and provides pain relief. So, somebody might take, by the way, like 5 grams of powder, or say like 10 of these capsules or something like that. And in order to get really the same kind of a relief, that might be in half a tablet of 7-O. And so, for example, this is what like a 7-O tablet would look like. So this is like a single alkaloid. It's not all the kratom. It's not all the kratom alkaloids. It's just one. And so it's very interesting for somebody who has, say, GI problems, say Crohn's disease, even people with fibromyalgia have gut problems, people that have taken medications. I've taken gabapentin for years. My stomach is terrible. If you've taken NSAIDs, right, for pain relief, your stomach is not very happy. If you add all that kratom powder on top of it, kratom can be acidic. It can also be a COX inhibitor, so it can irritate the stomach lining. I actually had an issue where I was using kratom for years and it was great for me. And all of a sudden my stomach was like, no more. Like, if you put a single thing in there, like, we're not doing this. I ended up in the hospital actually one time from gastritis, and it was like, you're gonna have to stop using kratom. Not like I was escalating or addicted or anything. It just literally wasn't working. It wasn't safe for my stomach, and so I had to stop for a little bit. It was just interesting because I had discovered the 7-O, and I go, okay, I still need the pain relief, and I just take this one little tablet and it's not irritating or burning my stomach or causing any of these issues. And I go, so I'm literally just taking the active ingredient in this green powder and not having all these stomach issues. And it was amazing because here I am, I have the pain relief I need finally again. I can go start working again. So I was like literally bedridden because I couldn't get the relief I needed to actually work a full-time job. I'm trying to like limp, to like the next day, but it was really a struggle. And so I finally had my pain relief. I was able to really full-time go back to work. And then here I was being able to, do work now in a nonprofit for 7.0 because it really aligned with my values and, learning about this compound, et cetera. But the 7.0, to give it a little bit also more background, because you're going to hear, on if you do a Google search, you'll just see thousands of articles of like, this is gas station heroin, this is terrible, everyone's becoming addicted to it and things like that. So 7.0 is a partial mu opioid agonist. That is the very nerdy scientific term. But what that means is that if you compare the opioid receptor, say a light bulb. So if you have something, you have the switch, and no matter what you do, this light bulb is only like halfway, on. It's like dim sort of, and you're like, okay, I have the dimmer switch and then it's just stuck on dim, right? That's a partial mu opioid agonist. It's not activating the receptor fully. So you're going to get a little bit of pain relief. You're not going to get effects like respiratory depression or overdose or death, because it just can't activate that receptor in the same way that what we call a full opioid agonist can. A full opioid agonist is all the other traditional opioids out there, say fentanyl, morphine, oxycodone, the whole laundry list of opioids are technically traditional opioids. They have a different chemical structure than both 7.0 and mitragynine, those kratom alkaloids. So, they bind very well to that receptor and they turn it on fully. So that light bulb is super bright, right? And so it can do everything. It can, you'll take higher and higher doses if you have a full opioid, and you feel higher and higher. You'll feel better until all of a sudden respiratory depression kicks in, and then you stop breathing, you can get seizures, coma, overdose, etc. So the very different thing about 7.0 is that because it's a partial mu opioid agonist, people actually experience dysphoria, which is the opposite of euphoria or feeling good. They don't feel blessed, they feel like they feel yucky when they take it. So like you might feel nausea, headaches, etc. And you go, I don't want to take any more of that. That doesn't feel good. And secondly, because it is, it's a little bit of a pricier, I would say, pain management, plant-derived pain management tool. People are like, why would I spend any more money if it's not going to make me feel better? So it's very interesting that it has sort of the ceiling effect in terms of abuse potential, in terms of, overdose and mortality. And what we're seeing is now in 2025, there's been over maybe say 1 million users. We're estimating, and maybe actually more at this point, but there was a report and, based on sales and everything, that there should be about 1 million users. And the FDA, the federal government has all these different databases, and they report, what are the supplements causing problems, or the drugs causing problems, like why are people going to the ERs? And they haven't reported a single death attributed to just using 7.0. So for example, if somehow you didn't know that you weren't supposed to take 10 of these tablets or something, you're like, I'm going to take them all, right? You have no idea what you're doing, right? You're most likely, maybe you will get sleepy, but you're not going to end up dead. No one's going to find your dead body. And so that's really important here. Again, I'm not encouraging anyone to take all these, but because it doesn't activate the downstream pathways for respiratory depression by itself, it is actually very, very safe profile. In fact, maybe one of the safest pain relieving treatments out there, because anything can kill you. There's a thing called a lethal dose 50, LD50, and Tylenol has one, right? You can take enough Tylenol, you'll die. The more dangerous a substance is, the lower that dose is. For example, if you take morphine or oxycodone or things like that, that's why it's like, oh, well, if you take too many of these doses, you're not going to wake up. Well, in this case, again, because they have actually not found a lethal dose in mice. Because, the sales have happened in humans, we haven't really found a lethal dose in humans either. We don't want to find one. That would be terrible. But that's actually very interesting and promising in terms of harm reduction for addiction, or harm reduction for people with chronic pain. And I want to compare this directly because people are not understanding. We were not able to ever share the wonder of what we think this plant-derived compound is. We think it's a plant-derived Suboxone. And Suboxone is actually a combination of two drugs. It's a combination of buprenorphine as well as naloxone. Buprenorphine is the drug that we're going to directly compare 702. So buprenorphine is also a partial mu opioid agonist, and it's used for opioid abuse treatment. It's also used sometimes in a detox setting in an ER where somebody will come in, having an overdose, and they'll give them the Suboxone, and they'll withdraw, under a doctor's care, and then they'll put them on the Suboxone maintenance. Chronic pain patients are also being tapered off of traditional opioids and onto Suboxone because doctors believe it has a safer profile because it's really hard to overdose on, just like 7-0. It's like, well, it might make you feel terrible, if you take too much, but you're not going to stop breathing and dying. Whereas all these other opioids have a very, very unsafe profile. So it's very interesting that we have this plant-derived compound, the 7-0, that acts very similarly to Suboxone. I would say that the main difference between the two is that Suboxone just has a longer half-life. So Suboxone has like a half-life of like 72 hours. 7-0 is a little bit shorter. So it's like 4 to 6 hours. So Suboxone is really hard to come off of if you ever talk to addiction therapists. Some of their patients are like, well, we stabilized them on Suboxone for opioid treatment or for chronic pain, but it took a year and a half for them to taper down. And that's because of that long half-life.
Half-life
7-0,
meaning how long a substance is kind of active in your body after you ingest it in some way.
yes, exactly. And so, one of the nice things about 7-0 is it does work, within, about 15 to 30 minutes, depending on your body chemistry, it works, and people feel like the majority of the effects for about 3 to 4 hours, and then it comes out of your body. It's not, in there, attached to the receptor forever. So, if somebody is using this responsibly, they shouldn't feel terrible withdrawal effects. So we think that, the withdrawal effects are more, they're slightly more severe than, caffeine. We don't want to trivialize the fact that there can be withdrawal effects because this is an opioid receptor stimulating compound. But when you think about kratom also has the metrogenine, it has a little bit of 7-0, it has all these different other alkaloids that do things like dopamine and serotonin, like they hit all these random receptors. Kratom itself has withdrawal symptoms, and so it's like not a benign substance either. Like I always tell people, I'm like, if you don't need it, maybe like think about really think about diving in, right? You're like, oh, it's a coffee alternative, like, but it's an opioid receptor, coffee alternative. Like, be careful, be mindful of your use. Don't be escalating and things like that. It's like the person that is, very, very dependent on caffeine is, coming to work with like 12 energy drinks, and you're like, you have a problem. So,
Right.
you can have a problem with kratom, even though it's supposed to be natural and things like that. In the
Yeah.
same way, I mean, people could have issues consuming 7-0 for pain or things like that. It's about responsible use. It's about, starting low and making sure that you're using the proper dosing. Again, because it does cause that dysphoria, that, bad feelings, at higher doses. It does have a little bit better safety profile, but there is one really important thing to note that, if you're on any other medications, it might not be safe for you. For example, I'm very, very, wary and very mindful of my use because I'm on gabapentin. Gabapentin is a sedative, and there's actually a warning. It's like, don't use opioids when you're on gabapentin. They don't like that, right? But it's interesting because like people like me with fibromyalgia were like, well, I have nerve pain plus bone pain plus this pain. And it's like, well, you're telling me I can't have opioids because I have a nerve pain drug, but like all the other types of pain I have are not being managed by gabapentin. And so, it's like arthritis and this and that. It's like, well, I need something. And so for me, I just make sure that I use very low dose and make sure I'm like, oh, I'm not taking 2 pills, like just be mindful of your use. And I've said that for years with any of these natural medicines, whether it's kratom, whether it's cannabis. It's like, how many gummies did you take today? Like, no, just like your medication. You're like, there's a difference between I took 4 capsules or I took 3 capsules, right? It's really important to know when you took something, how much you took, and that doesn't change when it's just a natural medicine. Like, make sure that you're tracking your consumption. Because I think that the biggest problem with any of these substances is when somebody's like, oh, I forgot that I'm taking 20 grams instead of 10. You're like, that's double the dose, with any of these substances, especially something that can stimulate your opioid system. you want to be mindful that you don't build tolerance. And tolerance is when you take the same substance and it just doesn't work the same. And so you go, okay, I need more now. And then you take more, and then your receptors desensitize, and then you need more and more and more. And so I always tell people, whatever substance you're taking, whether it's 7-0, whether it's kratom, whether it's cannabis, take tolerance breaks. And that could mean, a day, that could be 2-3 days, depending on, how your system responds. Sometimes you might get a little bit of those like headaches, or, like sometimes people get a little sweaty or something like that if they, withdraw from kratom or 7-0. I always like to tell people, hey, there's other tools out there, stimulate your system with CBD. CBD is actually a great tool in general for opioid, withdrawal symptoms and things like that. People that are opioid dependent sometimes use cannabis or CBD. And so, what I tell people is, hey, if you ever have an issue with any of these substances, you feel uncomfortable, like lean into other plant allies, stimulate the other receptors. And that way you give the opioid receptor a break, but you're stimulating your endocannabinoid system instead. Because they activate the opioid system, yes, you may not die from them if you take them by yourselves, but you need to know you can't take alcohol with them. You can't take other drugs that are sedatives. That could even be like a OTC sleeping pill that contains Benadryl. There's actually been deaths where Benadryl and kratom, or, we're not sure how it interacts with 7-0, but like there are things that if it puts you to sleep, you're not supposed to have respiratory depression with these substances, but if you start mixing in the other things, they sort of synergize and they're like, hey, let's put you down forever. Nobody wants that. So I want to urge people, whether you're taking kratom, whether you're exploring 701, to try not to use it with other substances, because it can be dangerous, especially based on your own genetics. So you might not know how you metabolize things. 2, to really try to talk to somebody. And I know it's hard because not a lot of doctors are kratom competent. We saw this issue when people wanted to talk to their doctors about cannabis, right? Oh, I have cancer. I want to see, how my doctor thinks I should take these cannabis products. And the doctor's like, I wasn't taught this in medical school. So if they didn't do continuing education on it, they had no idea. That's where we're at with kratom. Like, no one really knows about it. And now, unfortunately, your doctor does know about 7-0 because the FDA sent a letter saying, like, this was terrible, that this is super addictive, watch out, your patients are doing these weird drugs. So now your doctor, if you mention it, is going to say, oh, heck no, don't take this. It's a very, very bad drug, right? And again, we are doing clinical, research. Right now, there's preclinical research happening in India, like $100,000 study looking at different drug interactions and validating some of the other research that's been out there. There's been research in dogs. We're moving into humans. And then when all this stuff happened, it's just like, well, I don't think the groups are going to be investing in the research when they think that the industry is going to be made completely illegal in maybe a month or two. And it's been really hard because, we've seen so many promising things based on the people that we talk to. And I mean, every day to be able to be like flooded with stories of, say, somebody that was struggling with alcohol addiction and was literally like going to kill themselves, found 7-0 and they've been sober, again, what your definition of sober might not be, they're on 7-0 pills, but anyways, they're no longer using alcohol and they found something that is stable and they're able to maintain a good quality of life, work, etc., and they're happy. Like, that to me is like, if we're saving lives every single day, to have the FDA go, hey, I don't care if we take it away from 1 million people. We're actually going to save so many more people. No, you have to do the public health math, and the math has to math, right? If you take it away from 1 million people, where will those 1 million people go for pain relief or for substance abuse recovery support, right? This is the reality of a person with chronic pain or a person who is looking for opioid assisted treatment.
So it's interesting. So people might be going, wow, this is kind of mind blowing. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's helpful, maybe not, but we've kind of been taught to say, well, if it can be harmful, let's just ban it, because that's what we do with things that we maybe don't understand yet, or things that we are afraid of, or things that we've heard a bad story about. And certainly I have heard positive stories from people using 7-0. I've heard negative stories from people using it. Some of it is interesting because I was talking to a couple of people this week and they were saying, so it's a layer that is on top of this is that there are lots of people who would say, that if you are using anything repeatedly, that would qualify as addiction. So I think it's helpful to clarify again. Just because you use something regularly does not mean that you are addicted to it. Even if your body is dependent on it, does not mean that it's causing harm in your life. There's lots of medical conditions for which people take substances daily that their bodies become dependent on. They will feel some sort of withdrawal from if they stop taking. But we recognize that in the medical community. Nobody says your insulin is like, this is terrible. I can't believe you're taking insulin, even though your body becomes dependent on it. But is it improving your health and your quality of life and your happiness? And so I was talking to a family member of somebody who was using 7.0, and they were saying, this is so it was interesting because their perspective was, my family member used to be using other things. They are now using this, and I consider that to still be addicted. Instead of kind of thinking through the lens of, is their life healthier than it was? Are they doing better? Are they more able? And I'm not saying they are. Maybe they're not. And maybe, everybody's experience is not the same. But it has been interesting hearing from people who there are a group of people whose mindset is, it doesn't matter if they were using fentanyl on the street before and now they're using something that's legal and it's not contaminated like 7.0. That's still negative. That's still bad. They're still addicted. This is still a problem. Instead of looking at what is the quality of life of the person, is this kind of health and happiness? And I love the health and happiness thing because I was talking with a guy yesterday who he got sober through kind of traditional abstinence AA, that approach. But he's really supportive of lots of different pathways to recovery, which is not always true. And I said, what is it for you that what kind of made that mental shift for you that this worked for you, but you don't have to hold everyone else to that standard? And he said, it's because I am always looking at what is helping someone be healthier and happier. And so I'm not focused on, are they abstinent? What exactly are they putting in their body or not putting in their body? I'm thinking about, are they healthier and happier? Isn't that what we want for people? Isn't that why we even care about abstinence in the first place? Is because we think that that's going to be how people are healthier and happier. That's true for some people. But for other people, they're going to be healthier and happier with some sort of other support, whether it is pharmaceutical medicine, whether it's plant medicine, whatever it might be, that we need to make that shift to start thinking about how can people be healthier and happier, not just how can they not be putting anything in their body.
Yeah, exactly. I think, we talk about bodily autonomy and medical freedom. I think the way that you live your life and the way that you take care of yourself, whether that's through food, whether that's through pharmaceuticals, whether that's through plant medicine, it's your life and it's your choice. And I don't think anyone should pass judgment on that. I do want to say that we are in full support of people, finding those other pathways. I really feel like 7.0 and kratom can be sort of a safety net for people, especially very marginalized people that have lost their traditional options, that have been tapered off of opioids or, can't fill their prescriptions or things like that, right? We're a good safety net. Now, if somebody is stabilized and they now have the financial resources or the time or, even the mental bandwidth to go deeper into that work, deeper into, I need therapy or, going to that root of what is causing my, my problematic use, my addiction. How can I go in those next steps in recovery? You can't do that when you're in the spiral. You can't do that when you are just trying to, go from paycheck to paycheck. You really need to have some kind of ground underneath you. And I think that 7.0 can provide that ground. And, whether somebody wants to explore ibogaine treatment, like you said, really get to the root of their opioid addiction, we support that 100%. In fact, we were actually at Psychedelic Science, the nonprofit that I advise, Seven Hope Alliance. We were educating all these different addiction centers and therapists, and we're talking to the ibogaine centers. We're really trying to understand, hey, maybe somebody even goes through the ibogaine treatment, and they have chronic pain, but like they still need something, right? It's like, we never know how somebody's brain is going to heal, right? And I think sometimes people go through and like, oh, we don't need opioids anymore. And sometimes they're like, well, I still have issues, but like also my body just needs this, like a little bit, right? And again, it's talking about those different pathways to recovery. What does recovery look like for you? It's going to look different for each and every person. Somebody who was using a ton of heroin before, even if they go and get treatment and go through ibogaine, and all they need now is the lowest dose of 7-0 possible, right? For the rest of their life, that's a win. That is an absolute win.
Thanks so much, Michele. This has been really interesting. And I hope that I hope it's sparked your curiosity, because there's a couple of kind of big things at play here. One is medical freedom. Some people care about, hey, you know what? The government shouldn't be telling me what I can and cannot put in my body. I should be able to have the ability to try different things, whether that's in end of life scenarios or whether that's in pain management scenarios. There are so many pain patients now that are suffering because it's really difficult to get other kinds of pain medicine today. And sometimes they just don't work, or they have lots of terrible side effects, or who knows what the case may be. But so there's kind of that medical freedom side that is important for some people. That would be kind of the main thing that they're looking at this for. We aren't, at End It for Good, we're not pro drug of any sort, but we are pro people having options for whatever it is that they are facing. I have never had chronic pain. I don't have any idea what it's like to wake up in the middle of the night because I cannot sleep because of pain. I don't have any idea what it's like to try to work my job in the midst of chronic pain. It is a pretty proud thing for me to say, I know what's right for someone in chronic pain. I know what they should and shouldn't take. I don't have any idea what they should and shouldn't take. I don't have their body. I don't have their experiences. I don't know what might work or what might not work for them. So we need to be really careful about telling people that we know what is best for them on a medical front and a health front. I think that's something that I see over and over again is people trying to say, no, you should or shouldn't be doing this. Whether it is you shouldn't take Suboxone, you should just be sober, cold turkey abstinent, or no, you shouldn't take opioids. You shouldn't need that. You should just do acupuncture and that will help with your pain. Maybe, maybe not, but that is not my choice to make for someone else of what is working for them. But then also, so there's kind of this like, we should offer people pathways to whatever can help them be healthier. But also there's the negative side of that, saying, even if you don't agree with that, even if you think no one anywhere should be using this substance, what's going to happen if you push it to the underground market, which is what Schedule 1 will do, is that it's going to become contaminated, higher potency. People are going to be arrested for consuming it. People are going to be arrested because they're selling it, because it has pushed it into this kind of criminal underground where the only people who can sell it are people who are willing to break the law. So whether you see a proactive positive for something like 7-0 or for kratom or for whatever the other substance is, or not, there is still a solid argument for why it should not be made Schedule 1, because it's going to push it to the underground, and that is going to be far more harmful to consumers and to the rest of the community, as they have to live with the harm that comes from underground markets and contamination and all of the other problems. So what I see over and over again is this, people, their response is, it can potentially be harmful, let's ban it, so it's not harmful. And really what we're saying is not, the question isn't, can a drug be harmful or not? That's the wrong question to be asking. That's a question that is related to what types of regulation should we have in place to protect people. But if you think a drug is harmful, the very last place that you want it to be is in the underground market, where there's no regulations. We don't know who's selling it. We can't control who's buying it. There's no age gating. There's no quality control. It is the wildest of wild west out in the underground market, which is why we've got people dying from fentanyl who didn't even know they were using fentanyl. This is what happens when you push a drug out of a legal, regulated market. If you don't want it to be marketed to children, that's only something that you can have some control over if you're able to regulate it. If you push it out of the legal market, you don't get any control over how it's marketed, to who it's sold to. And agreed, I look at some of the packaging and say, are these people out of their minds? This is crazy. Like, this is children's packaging. And I think for people like you that are consumers, for people like me that are just advocates, we can look at that and say, hey, this is terrible. And the way that we get rid of that is not through banning it. It's through regulating it and having some control over that instead of just pushing it into this Wild West where we don't get any control over anything. So I'd encourage people to think about the questions you're asking when you're deciding, what is it I think we should do with kratom or 7-0 or whatever the next thing is that we're going to be talking about. The question isn't, is it harmful or not? The question is, how do we reduce whatever potential for harm that there is? And we've got to reckon with the fact that underground markets increase harm in a host of different ways. There's obviously a market for 7-0 that sprang up very quickly. It's only been in the market for 18 months or so when we're recording this. It's a new product. We need to be able to study it. We need to know whether or not, what are the interactions with other drugs? What are the ways that people can be safer or less safe if they're using it? That's only possible if we're able to regulate it and study it. And that is the path that we hope we take forward. Again, not because we think everyone should be using it, but because the least harmful way to approach a substance like this is to have some regulatory control over it. And then on the flip side of that, there are people like Michele who are living with chronic pain and who are living with diseases for which sometimes pharmaceuticals work well and sometimes they don't. Or sometimes you need a combination of plant medicine and pharmaceuticals. And so that nuance that's there is something we got to really lean into. And if that conversation is interesting to you, join us over on our newsletter. We send out things like this, commentary on new things happening in the world related to substance use or addiction. You can sign up for that at enditforgood.com. And it's on all of our pages. Basically, you can sign up for our newsletter anywhere. And that will also, that's where we send out event information, whether it's virtual events or in-person events or opportunities for you to get involved in some way. We have a lot of people on our newsletter list who are supportive of 7-OH being legal, and a lot who aren't, who think, no, this is a bad thing. This is, and I love that because we are always saying we want to invite people on a journey. We want to invite you to come and wrestle with these issues. You don't have to be where we are on everything in the beginning. You can read this newsletter. You can be part of our stuff for years and say, look, I agree with you on this one area. Maybe we need more options for recovery, but I don't agree with you on any of the kind of legal market stuff. That's okay. We want to provide a place for people to be in conversation, to be wrestling with this, because substance use is not something that's going away. Bodies that are broken and suffering is not something that is going away. Addiction is not something that's going away. We have long-term human experiences that this is related to, and we need to lean into how can we help approach people who are struggling with whatever variety of things they might be struggling with in a way that is health-centered and compassionate, helps them live healthier and happier lives, and avoids that knee-jerk reaction of fear, because we can't think when we're afraid. Our brains just shut down. We go into fight, flight, freeze. We just become unable to reason, to learn. So we need to push away from that fear, lean into, let's get our brains online, not offline, as we're trying to think about this. And so thank you for coming and bringing your personal experience as well as your professional experience. I know people will have differing opinions about this. My encouragement is keep leaning in, keep learning, keep listening to stories, because for people like me that don't know what it's like to live with chronic pain, we need to be listening to the stories of people who are living with chronic pain, who are being cut off of prescriptions that maybe have given them some quality of life, who are finding maybe a better quality of life using something like plant medicine, which may be a little uncomfortable for us that aren't familiar with it. That doesn't mean that we should just shut it down. It means we should look for ways to reduce harm, to bring some regulations so that children are safer, adults are safer, and we have more options for people to live healthier and happier lives. So thank you so much, Dr. Ross, for joining us. We will put connection points for you in the show notes of the podcast. And just leave us with, if there's one thing you want people to take away from this, what is it, and how can they get in touch with you if they're interested in talking more?
Sure. I would say that right now it's very urgent, if you believe in protecting plant medicine and medical freedom, to join the fight to save 7.0, whether it's for you, whether it's a family member, whether it's, again, just a sort of philosophy. I wouldn't say this, sort of like a core value for you is protecting medical freedom. So you can go to save7oh.org. And that is the campaign between the 7 Hope Alliance, also the lobbying group, Holistic Alternatives Recovery Trust, or HART. We've put together this website that allows you to contact legislators to tell them, don't schedule this. This is silly. And so, like, literally one click, you know, no matter what state you're in, it'll go to your state representatives. It also has a petition. Right now we have over 15,000 people that have signed a petition saying don't schedule 170. So it's really important for our representatives, especially the White House, to see, hey, people are against this. Because, you know, if there's 1,000 people against this, they go, whatever, you know. But if you have 100,000 people, you know, sign this petition, it's super important. It's very similar to the fight that happened in 2016, where they tried to schedule kratom itself. And the people, you know, fought back. They had their voice heard. They signed petitions. They went and rallied in the White House, right? We have to rally for medical freedom because, again, they're going to keep, if you give them an inch, they take a foot, right? And today it's 7.0, tomorrow it's all kratom. You know, what is it next? We really have to protect patient rights. So save7oh.org, and also 7hopealliance.org is our nonprofit foundation. So you could always shoot me an email over there if you want to learn more. If you've heard bad things about 7.0 and you need support or something like that, we're here. We're non-judgmental. We're just here to support. So thank you, guys.
Thanks so much. Join us next time on the End It for Good podcast for more great conversation and guests. And in the meantime, head on over to social media at End It for Good MS, and let's keep the conversation going.
So how do we shift our drug policies from a criminal justice approach to a public health approach? By inviting one person at a time to change their mind. Changed minds are the catalyst to changed laws. But many people are only willing to have this conversation when they're invited to by someone that they trust. That's you. Invite your friends, coworkers, other people in your circle of influence to consider a better way. At End It for Good, our hope is that people who hear will become people who tell. Start a conversation and join the movement to end it for good.